Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome back to a kind of special late night edition. Though you actually, if I didn't say anything, you wouldn't know when we video this, except that you can tell lots of times that the sun has gone down when we occasionally record one of these because of the way the background looks. So this is a special nighttime edition. It's actually rather late. This might be the latest night one I've ever done, but I have to tell you, I am a night owl, and so this doesn't bother me in the least. And it's also going to be our last video from the Exodus scriptures. So this is chapter 40, the last chapter, and I'm going to read the last paragraph of the last chapter as the text tonight. And and I think I'm going to do one, possibly two more videos as just kind of a wrap up of all of Exodus, because even as I've gone through this, and even as I've worked off of my notes, I've ended up with more notes. And I've ended up seeing some things as we've gone along and seeing some trends. And I just want to remind you of all of those because they're just super important to our lives. And if we are sincere about following Christ, the lessons here from Exodus are literally eternal lessons. And so I just kind of want to bring those into focus one more time. Whether that's going to take one more or two more after this, I'm not quite sure yet. So starting with the last paragraph of the last chapter, it says this: "The cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle." Okay, so remember, they put the tabernacle together. They've been, putting all the materials together for a while. They've got Aaron and his sons all ready to roll as far as being the high priests and getting all the daily functions going with the Levites. The baking of the bread and the making sure there's enough oil in the lamp and the incense and all of those kinds of things. And they're just this is the beginning. They're starting out with this. And Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it. So you have this place called the tent of meeting that Moses has kind of set up along the way, where God would come and meet with him. Well, this time the cloud is so powerful over the tent of meeting that Moses can't even get in there. All right, and so Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. So as that was happening, the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And, of course, that would be the first time. And throughout all of their journeys, and this verse 36 is really just an amazing verse. Throughout all of their journeys, whenever the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the people of Israel would set out. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not set out till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day, and fire was in it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all of their journeys. So, we've talked about this pillar of cloud and this pillar of fire that was out ahead of them, always visible to them as they camped along the way. They were able to always see this, and so that's why some of the things they do are like real head scratchers, right? Because you're like, don't you still see the presence of God? It's just right out there in the cloud, or it's right out there in the fire, the pillar of fire. But what happens now is that pillar now moves out over the tabernacle and actually is above the tabernacle for the entire rest of their journey. And of course, this is God's way of saying, "Hey, I approve of this. I had you build this tabernacle. I've made a promise that I'm going to come and dwell, and I'm going to come and dwell in such a way that it's really obvious. Okay, so that nobody has to guess whether the presence of God is in the tabernacle, because this cloud or fire is there all the time, and they know that it's time to go when this cloud or fire lifts up and moves in a certain direction. They know, it's time to, because the tabernacle is right in the middle of all the tribes. All the tribes are settled around that in their tents, and in a specific order, but the tabernacle is always in the middle of Israel. And so when the pillar would get up and move, they knew it was time to go. If somebody was thinking, hey, maybe it's time to go, but the pillar didn't move, it wasn't time to go. Okay. But, the thing that I really want to bring out with this is that, sometimes we are like, wow, I'm doing this, and I'm doing that, and I'm doing this other spiritual thing, and I'm doing this other spiritual activity, but it just doesn't seem like the glory of the Lord is with me. I don't feel that powerful presence in my life where I can actually say the glory of God is here present in my life. Maybe it's become just kind of dry and rote and those kinds of things. Well, be careful, because sometimes what that means. Well, let me say this first. Sometimes what that means is that God simply wants you to live by faith. Okay, and so there are times when we don't feel God, because God wants us to use our faith rather than our feelings in order to follow Him and go where He wants us to go. Okay, but there can be other reasons for not feeling the glory of God, and sometimes that reason is because the glory of God has moved out ahead of us to a new place. And, whether that's some place of emotional maturity, whether that's some place of spiritual maturity, that the presence of God has moved out, or sometimes it's actually physical. God wants you in another place. God wants you ministering in a different place than where you are now. And He wants to move you out from that secure place that you're in to a place of insecurity. So He moves His glory out in front of you, so that you can catch up to it. And this can be also true as far as things like habits and traditions. Many of our churches suffer because they're trying to recapture some glory that happened 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And the glory of God has moved out ahead of that. The presence of God has moved out ahead of where you were. So in a lot of churches, the church needs revival. Okay, we all agree that the North American church needs revival. Okay, so what we do is we schedule revival services, and but we do them in the way that we did them 100 years ago. Nothing changes. And our expectation of what happens with revival services is the same as it was 100 years ago or 50 years ago. And then we wonder why, when the evangelist leaves, everything is still pretty much the same. Well, it's because the glory of God has moved out into another place. What if revival looks different next time, right? What if revival happens in the streets rather than in the churches? What if a new generation of followers of Jesus Christ are not laying hands on the sick in the church, but they're laying hands on the sick in the streets, in people's homes, okay? And people are experiencing the miracles of God and then giving their lives to Christ. That sounds an awful lot like revival to me. I don't know. But sometimes we pigeonhole revival by saying that it has to look like this, this certain thing, okay? So when it comes to the glory and the presence of God, we need to learn to travel with it in order to stay in it. We need to learn to travel with it in order to stay in it. Don't go back and push the same old buttons over and over and over again. Look for something fresh from God, because God is all about new. God says over and over, I'm doing a new thing here. I'm doing a new thing here. I'm doing a new thing here. Sends his son. I'm doing a new thing here. I'm going to do a new thing in the human heart. God is all about new, and sometimes we get stuck in a certain place in our lives, and we think because something great happened there before, we think, well, it's bound to happen here again, when actually the presence of God has gotten up and moved to a different place, not because he wants to get away from you, but because he wants you to follow him. So in a sense, what God is saying here is, I'm not removing the sight or the knowledge of my glory, right? They can still see it, but I am changing the location of it so that you will move to where it is, because God knows, he knows that he knows that he knows that we have this terrible problem of getting stuck. And everywhere along the way, here are the Israelites getting stuck. And so God is like, no, you've got to follow the cloud. And where does the cloud go? Well, eventually it ends up in the land of promise. And this is exactly the way God wants to deal with our lives. He never wants us to get us spiritually stuck. He never wants to put us in the same place where we're like, oh yeah, this is familiar, so I don't have to have a lot of faith, and all my security is in my stuff and in my things, and I don't want anything like challenging to my life, like God asking me to go someplace else, or God asking me to do something different than I've done for the last 20 years to serve Him, and we get stuck in that. But God moves the cloud, and He moves the pillar of fire. He moves the pillar because He wants us to move with it. He wants us to move where He is. As I said, He's not trying to get away from us. He's not trying to run away from us. He's trying to get us to follow and get us to move. And really, very much, there's, from the rescue on, from the rescue from bondage on, that's very much the story of Exodus, of God trying to take a group of people and move them in the direction that they need to go. Because the rescue from bondage is great, it's wonderful, it's fantastic, but it's not the only thing that God has for us. God has a whole plan out ahead of us. God has a whole desire for our lives out ahead of us as we head towards maturity and change and eventually that land of promise in our lives. So that's it for tonight. As I said, there's going to be probably one or two at the most follow-up videos, and then we're done with Exodus and on to the next thing, which I'm thinking right now might be Galatians, because I want to do some New Testament work. But I say unto you, with only a few seconds left, Vita brevis gloria aeterna. Life is short, glory is eternal. Don't forget, we're on Facebook. We have a MeWe presence. And we really need you to like and subscribe and do all those things on YouTube, which is what sponsors all this. So have a great night. God bless you.